Okay.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us again. Today's a little bit different. We're meeting on a Tuesday instead of a Thursday, but that is because on Thursday, here in the United States, we celebrate with a holiday dedicated to giving thanks for blessings and harvest and family and friends and good health. And I know that many of you have a similar celebration of harvest. And so this is, I think, the season for us. And if it's a season for you, we wish you all the blessings as well. This evening, we have a presentation that will be talking about living on and off campus. And of course, we will be talking in reference to UC Riverside because that's our home campus and it's what we know. And our presenter this evening is Dr. James Smith, and he's going to give us some insight into the decisions that many students face about living on or off campus. So, whenever you're ready, Dr. Smith.
Great. So I will start by clicking my share screen button here. Hopefully everything works. Oh, yes. It's as much as we do this, I should be used to it by now, but so thank you for joining us this evening or morning, depending on where you are. My name is James Smith and I work at UC Riverside in residential life. I've been on campus for approximately 16 years. Prior to working at UC Riverside, I also worked at the University of California, Santa Cruz, as well as I also worked at the University of the Pacific. So I'm originally from Michigan and worked at Michigan State for a while as my graduate work, and then undergrad was at Eastern Michigan. So that's sort of a little bit about me. There will be some questions, so feel free if you have questions to ask them, and we will try to answer them at the end of the session. So this session is about living on and off campus. So our studies show, when we talk about studies, we like to look at research, right? And studies do show us that residents who tend to live on campus find connections quicker, both the human as well as the resources, and are ultimately more successful than students who may not live on campus. And those are according to Aston, Pasquarella, Terenzini. And so I do have at the end of the presentation also a list of resources that may be of assistance. Students who live off campus, we really encourage students who live off campus to connect themselves to campus resources with assistance from campus whenever possible. And those are some of the things that we also try to do. Because we do feel that students who are connected tend to be more successful, whether that's in the classroom or living with us. Those who are able to find those connections tend to be more successful academically as well as socially. And so just a little bit about a little overview of our session this evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about what residential life is, our department, a little bit about our structure and our staffing levels and who's living with us and how they help and support our students, some of the programs and services that we offer to our students, as well as ways to connect those students who may not be living on campus with us. Again, we always hope that students will live with us, but those who don't, we want to make sure that they're getting connected to. And some of the guiding principles that help us in support of the learning that our students are doing on campus, but they will help us in providing the support for our students. And so UC Riverside, our residential life department, is committed to the development of a safe, inclusive, living and learning community, which holistically fosters academic, social, cultural, and personal growth. That's a lot of words to really just say we're trying to connect our students to help them be successful. We include everyone from all backgrounds who live with us and making sure that they're getting the services that they need to be successful on campus. That's really what we're about. We are a department within student affairs who partners with housing services to provide programs and services that complement the student experience. UC Riverside is a bifurcated housing system. And so what that means is we have two different reporting structures, housing on our campus is separated from residential life. And so residential life reports to student affairs, and our housing services is an auxiliary and reports to the business and finance side on our campus. And that, depending on the campus you work at, is very different. And so some of the goals and objectives might be a little different in terms of what they're trying to do, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to help our students be successful. And so UCR has traditional types of residence halls as well as apartment style living for the students who live with us on campus. And so when we think about the staffing levels, who's in charge of all of these students, right? Who works with everybody? We have a large number of students living with us when we're not in our COVID situation that we're currently in right now. We generally have about 7,000 students who live in those different types of apartments or residence halls. And predominantly first-year students will live in our residence halls because they're more traditional with the longer hallways, shared bathroom experiences. And then as they progress throughout their time at UCR, they tend to move over to the apartments. And there's more of an independent living. So in all of our communities, our student staff members who live with us are employed by us, are our students who live on the communities and in the halls. We have our resident advisors, and those are our students as well, and they're primarily responsible for the safety and the conflict mediations that may occur. Sometimes roommates might not get along. There's someone in the community to help them, and those are our resident advisors. We also have in the communities program advisors, and they're responsible for programming for our students and putting together activities and events that students will attend to keep them engaged in their community. And then we also have our assistant resident directors, and they're more senior level students who primarily supervise and help with some of our conduct situations that may occur. And they also help plan and promote those events as well with our resident advisors and program advisors. So those are our student staffing positions that we employ. Again, students who live with us and work with us that are also a part of our community. We also have full-time staff members who live in the communities as well. Those are our resident directors, and all of them have master's degrees in varying levels of higher education administration or student affairs. They are all full-time professional staff members who have an apartment in the community. Some of them also have families who live with them. And they're our primary residential life contact for the community. They're often the ones who parents will call and ask about their student, or they're the ones who supervise the resident advisors in the community. They are the ones who handle some of those policy enforcement issues and conduct and things of that nature. And then we have, in our department, we have assistant directors who are in charge of, they live off campus, and they're sort of administrators in our department, and they supervise a variety of different activities and programs, staffing, training, development, those types of things, as well as the supervision of our resident directors on campus. And finally, we have our associate and director, which is myself, and then our director, who also live off campus. And we together sort of collaborate to ensure that all of our student staff and all of our professional staff are meeting the standards and making sure our students are safe. And so it's a large operation, and we try to work together as best we can to make sure that our students are, again, connecting and getting the resources that they need. And we also have faculty who live with us, actually, and some of our faculty, we have 2 faculty in residence who participate in engaging in some of our programs. And so they also work with us to, again, provide connections for the residents to make sure that they're being successful. And they also will sometimes see things that maybe our staff don't see, and so they'll help in reporting that information to us. And so that's sort of our structure and what we have in terms of who's supervising and who's working with our students. Sorry, I'm doing a lot of talking, so I have to drink some water as well. So I want to talk a little bit about some of those services that are provided for students who live with us. We do have, the students who live with us have access to peers in their communities, those resident advisors and program advisors that I talked about. They're the folks who are working on resource referrals, providing programs. They will also do sometimes small or minor mediations. they're all trained in emergency response. And so they're also on call and serve as a backup resource when things are happening. They're generally our first line of defense. And so their student staff members work with our professional staff members in the community to ensure that there's 24-hour, 7-day-a-week access for emergency. So when something happens, that a student is in crisis, or there's an emergency or a fire or something that might happen, there's someone there to help with our students and making sure that they're getting out of the building or exiting, or pretty much they're in charge of those things that are happening. And so they're also there for policy enforcement. Our department works to make sure that students are understanding the policies that they have that when they live with us. And so when students come to live with us, often they're independent and they don't necessarily know or understand rules and regulations. And so our staff are there to help make sure that they do. And then we help provide educational responses for them. So it's not very punitive. It's a very educational response, and making sure that they understand that when you encroach on somebody, or you're violating a policy, that you're also taking away from your community at the same time. And so we try to be really educative and making sure students are aware of what they're doing and how their contributions to the community are affected. We also provide activities and programs, academic, social, educational programs to help support our students. We're also providing partnerships with various campus offices to make sure that our students understand and are aware of the resources that are available to them. And then those who live in our residence halls are essentially, we connect them to a board plan, so they live on campus and they're also eating on campus as well. So they're everything they need is right there on campus, and they don't have to go far. And so currently, I added this as well, is that we're working with our students who are living with us through the COVID experience, and this is something no one has ever had to deal with. And so when we have students who need to be relocated, or they're in isolation or quarantine, we work with our health center on campus, and the university makes those decisions. Our campus is working with them, and our department is working with them to make sure that all students are safe and that they're following the protocols that are needed. And so it takes a lot of folks to do that. And it's also very time consuming, but we again want to make sure that our students are safe through this process. So as I mentioned, we're really about building connections, and our goal is to partner with our students to help to educate and retain them so that they understand what they're doing and what they're getting involved with when they live with us. And some of those things are through academic development, providing study skill sessions, and partnering with our campus academic resource center. The faculty and residents are doing programs to help students develop academically. We also provide that minor counseling. I'm not a counselor, but often I might have to coach or counsel students who might be in crisis or have roommate conflicts or things of that nature. And when we see a student who tends to be more elevated, we will refer them to our counseling and psychology services on campus. And so we're also providing the health and wellness programs for them to make sure that they are understanding that how to eat healthy, how to maintain proper health and fitness, how to take, not just study for 24 hours straight, how to go to sleep properly. And those are programs that we're providing, and as well as providing connections to campus resources to help students. If our staff is not fully aware, doesn't understand how to help a student, we will get them the resources that they need on campus. And so that's primarily what they're doing with health and wellness. And then that community development piece is so important in making sure that students are being introduced to one another so that they may build relationships and friendships, and also get to know campus resources. And so when students first come to live with us, we provide a week of welcome that we call it. This year's been a little different, but it's been all virtual, but we try to provide the resources to them through taking them around campus or showing them where things are at or keeping them engaged so that they know where everything is at and it's at their fingertips, so to speak. We also, our staff is working to understand student development theories, and I'll talk a little bit about that later in terms of where students are at and where their learning capabilities may be and where they're at in their development of their identity and who they are as a person. And so we will often work with our ethnic and gender equity offices on campus as well to make sure that our students understand and know where they are in their development. And if they don't know or we don't know, we try to again provide those resources for them. So those are just a few of the programs and the services that we're able to provide for the students who live with us to make sure that they're engaged, that they're connected, and that they're getting the most out of their experience to live with us on campus. And so again, the programs that we're providing are inclusive, intentional, build community, and support the learning. We're all about the mission of the university, which is about teaching and research, but also understanding and building community is so important. And so that's where we sort of help them and provide them that coaching and experiences where they're learning about who they are as a person and how they can contribute to the world. And some of that is through our social justice and awareness programming as well, and encourage the encouragement of awareness and advocacy of different populations. We have many students who live with us who are from different populations, very different backgrounds. And so we want to make sure that they're understanding of that and being educated on that and being able to advocate for students who are marginalized or underrepresented and being able to go out into the world and say, this is not right and this is not fair and this is what we want to do to help make sure that everyone has an equal playing field. So equity and social justice are a huge part of some of those programs that we're providing as well. We also have leadership opportunities within student housing. So our students are getting involved in things and being a part of clubs and organizations within housing. And so we are able to provide those opportunities for them through the Residence Hall Association, through staff positions, those RA and PA positions I mentioned earlier, as well as the National Residence Hall Honorary, which are national organizations that are a part of housing. And some of our students are really involved in those things, and they get to travel to conferences and learn from other campuses and what other students are doing. And it's a great organization for them to be a part of. We also continue to develop and train our staff. So some of those things I mentioned earlier, those emergency protocols and policy violations and things of that nature, we continue to train our staff so that they're aware of how to confront situations and how to work with students and how to be aware of things around them and their community so that they can help the students in on their floors and in their community be more attentive to what's around them. And finally, those student conduct policies, the process and holding our residents accountable for their behavior that I mentioned earlier. And our students are trained in that as well so that they're able to make those confrontations and to really intervene in a situation to help our students understand what they're about. So as you can see, it's a very educational process along the way. It's when students think of, often when folks think of people living on campus, they think of the negative things or the parties or sometimes the things that don't necessarily, the things that make the news, right? And so we try to talk about the things that are really not always making the news, the really good positive behaviors that students have on our campus. And we've been very fortunate that our students at UC Riverside are very academically focused. And so their understanding of why they're there, and we're there to work with them to get them to graduation, so to speak. So I mentioned a lot about the living on campus, but we also have in our community a lot of off-campus apartment communities that are not necessarily connected to campus or not owned by the university, but are close by. So we want to work with our campus resources such as Student Life. I believe there was a session last week or a couple weeks ago that talked about getting involved on campus. And so we work with Student Life to make sure that all students are involved. And as I mentioned earlier, students who are connected, they tend to be more successful when they know the resources that are available to them and how to feel a part of something. They tend to be more successful. So we want to make sure that those students who live off campus are also being connected as well. And so some of those things can also be through clubs and organizations, excuse me, as well as community service and learning initiatives. They're able to be a part of sports and recreation, housing services and residential life works with them to provide a resource for off-campus students to find housing. So if a student doesn't want to live on campus, they want to live off campus, there's a website that's available that helps to provide resources for those students who are living off campus. One of the things that we struggle with is those students who live off campus, they don't necessarily have the resources and the connections that they may have on campus. And so if something doesn't go well with a leasing option or something of that nature, they don't have the university to assist them as much as they would with a university owned housing. So there's some differences there, and we try to educate our students to make sure they understand when they're signing a lease that doesn't belong to the university, what that entails and what the resources are for them when things don't necessarily work in their favor. So we want to make sure that they're educated when they do decide to move off campus and understand what that means. We also want to make sure that they're finding community, and so we do make sure that one of the resources we do provide them is the use of the ethnic and gender offices on our campus to make sure that they're aware, as well as international student services. All of the services that are provided on campus are not just for on-campus students, but they are for all students at UC Riverside, and we want to make sure that students who do live off campus are getting connected to those resources as well. And something we've discovered with COVID is everyone's virtual, and it's much easier to connect with people sometimes, but it's also at the same time much more difficult to get to a place or to get to a location where there may not be people working. So making sure people are aware of those resources, and just again connecting them to the resources that are on campus. People who might need health or counseling, or stopping at their professor's office hours, those kinds of things are the things that we want to make sure students are always aware of, whether they live on campus or off campus, and that they're connecting themselves to the campus. So again, that they're successful by being connected. So within residential life and housing and student affairs in general, we really are grounded, our work is grounded in student development theory. And if you look to the left, there's sort of that's just one of them. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, everyone's heard of that, but it's rooted in psychology and studies of the 20th century, where young adults, as they progress through their college career, right? And Maslow talks about finding out, at the very basic level, that students feel that they have shelter, that they feel they have food, and that there's clothing, and that they feel psychologically safe, right? And then that their safety needs, such as security, employment, resources, that they have those things available to them. The love and the belonging comes from community development and building friendships, and getting them connected to resources and other places on campus so that they're able to learn and grow, and that they would hopefully build self-esteem and finally come to the actualization of who they are, and be a successful member of society. And so that's just one, and it's not really even a student development theory, but it's a psychological theory that we do in housing and residential life to make sure that our student staff are aware of these things, and so that they can kind of find and determine where students are in their growth and their development, and who they are as a person. So some of these student development theories, one of the issues that we look at is a lot of them that were started in the early 20th century they were done on men, and they were mostly white and upper middle class students. And so a lot of the things that we have today are not necessarily our student population. And so we have to look at other theories, but it helps to ground us, right? And so we can kind of understand where a student is coming from and where they might be in their development using some of these theories. And a lot of development theories today talk about their identity and who they are as a person, whether they're struggling to their sexual orientation, or their gender, or their race, or their religion. There's theories that are there to help us, guide us, and help the student get them to where they might need to be. And so a lot of our staff have taken classes in student development theory and try to understand student development theory so that they can then help support and challenge the students that live with us. And I say challenge because I think often our students believe that they know everything and they're ready to take on the world, but they may not know, they may not want to hear things. And so we lightly challenge them to think critically about their environment and to think critically about who they are and some of the things that they're facing. And so we try to help support them and guide them along and think of them holistically so that they're aware of all of the things that are around them. And so those are some of the things that we try to do in terms of understanding who students are so that we can meet the diverse student populations that we have and really meet them where they are and sort of talk with them on their level and not talking down to folks, kind of getting them to a place where we understand who they are and they can tell us, we can learn from each other, so to speak. And so that's basically been one of our guiding principles in residential life, is looking at those theories and try to figure out how we can best support students and where they are in their development. And so I've talked a little bit about our department and who we are at UC Riverside, and some of the programs and services that we've offered to our students and how we really work with them and partner with our students to connect them to the resources that are available to them. And that's done in many ways through our staffing, through our resident advisors, our resident directors, and the number of students who live with them to help support them and challenge them and help them grow. We want to also make sure that we're finding ways to connect those off-campus students to the resources that are available to them on campus and making sure that they're successful as well, because we all work for UCR students, and that's our goal, is to be a resource for them. Excuse me. And then also the use of student development theory that we use to help guide our students and get them to a place to where they should be, which is a hopefully a productive citizen who has an awareness of the world, not only of themselves, but of awareness of other people, and that they're being productive members of society and global citizens, because that's what we're hoping that all of us could be, right? And so in terms of the resources, here's just sort of a list there. And I know that the session is being recorded, so you can sort of go back and pause if you need to look at some of the resources that I use in this session to talk about, the student development theory, for instance. There's a book with a lot of different theories and psychological backgrounds of students and what we use to help guide us in finding out where students are at in their development. And then there's some articles and some books on residential life and housing at a university and what some of those components might be for folks. And so now I suppose I will be able to take some questions that might be available. I know I kind of went through a lot of information really quickly, but I also want to hear from folks if there are questions that I could answer.
Thank you, James. May I? Yeah. Thank you, James. I'm really impressed. So yeah, you guys are using scientific theory, right? Student development to train staff and help students. Yeah, that's I guess I was supposed to expect that, but yeah, somehow I did not. So yeah, that's really impressive.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you, I was always impressed with our students that work. I think you call them assistant resident directors, right? So how can a student become a resident director, and what are you mentioned kind of duties of those students, but how does student become? I mean, you cannot just apply, some experience is needed. So
Sure. So the students, we often will get the question in the early fall, even through orientation, like how can I become a resident advisor or a program advisor? And the first step is generally an application process. And then we do an interview process and work with their students and sort of put them through a different interviews to be able to understand, are they able to, because they do hear free room and board and they think, oh, great, I get to have my room, because we do provide a compensation for them, and it is a room and board. And so we want to make sure that they're understanding of that. And so then there's where you ask, then there's also often what'll happen is, like myself, for instance, as a student, way back in the day, I started as a resident advisor, and I really sort of fell into this field of student affairs. And so I wanted to do that. And so it took a lot of training and effort over the years. And I did have to go to grad school and learn some things and, be able to work with students. But I think we'll often see our students who want to be an RA just for the room and board, and I say it's not worth it because there's a lot of work that goes into it, and they soon learn. But they apply, they go through a process, a screening process, and they interview for those positions. And we generally, when we're full, we have about 150 student staff. And then right now, I think, I'm not sure how many we have, but we generally will have about 150 student staff, and we generally get about 500 applications every year. So it's quite a process. Yeah. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, may I keep on asking just one more? It's the
Sure.
same topic. I
Mhm.
remember there used to be faculty in residence program.
Mhm.
Do we still have that? And how does faculty become faculty in residence? And what if faculty has a family? And is that then possible, or only single faculty? Please just faculty in residence.
Yeah, so we currently have two faculty in residence, Dr. Sochi Chavez and Dr. Boris Nunley, who are both faculty members at UC Riverside. And they generally will get they have an apartment on campus and a meal plan with us. And they do some programs and office hours and things of that nature to try to connect with students. We do have space for more. We would like to have more. Right now, we're kind of waiting until we get through this COVID period, but we've generally worked with folks to put the word out to folks, particularly new faculty members. The apartments are not huge, and so we did have actually our assistant vice provost, Dr. Jennifer Brown, was serving as one last year. So she had a family that lived with us, and so it is possible to have a family, but it's a smaller apartment, so it's not quite as big, and you're also around students all the time. So, but we will probably be looking for folks again in the hopefully in the summer. So yeah.
Sachit is wonderful. I'm sure she brings a lot of dimensions to her role there.
She's great. Yeah, she's
Yeah.
wonderful, and she's really connected with the students as well. So it's
Yeah,
great for
really.
faculty to do that. So yeah.
May I ask more just? So I know that our residence hall are mostly for undergraduates, right? And but then my graduate student is living in some of so how the what is the process for graduate students to move into residence hall? I guess they don't like living there, but why not? Yeah, I mean my students loves it. Yeah. So
Yeah. So we have apartments and residence halls both. And so a lot of our graduate students will tend to gravitate toward to our apartments because it's more of an independent living. They don't have to have a meal plan. And I think as we have expanded at UCR, the common theory has used to been that only first year students live in the residence halls. But as we've expanded and grown, we've seen some more non-traditional transfer students and even some other graduate students who might want to live in a residence hall. They would just indicate that when they apply for their housing application that they would want to live in a residence hall. And I think with North District coming online next year, we'll have even more spaces. And so we'll probably have some ideas of graduate students who would want to live in that type of a community. But yeah.
correct. More rooms in North District, right? More place for graduate student. But that reminds me, North District was built at the place when there was a family student housing. So
Mhm.
where do we place now students that have families?
Yes, so we have Oban Family Housing, and so there's an apartment complex right there at the corner of Linden and Canyon Crest, where our families live. I think there's 150 units or so. So we have students who do live in family housing. They have families. There's a playground, and they just sort of moved over to that area. So yeah.
I have a question about international students living in our housing. Is there any research that indicates success, first year success in particular, by having them be right there on the campus and privy to all of the resources that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think most students in general, when they do, particularly international students, since the resources are there, they're going to tend to be more successful just because of the connections and the resources that are provided. But those who live off campus, again, I think if they're able to find community, the students who tend to find community in some way or feel connected in some way are going to be more successful inevitably. But I think the ones that are what we've learned too is that we're kind of spread out with our international students at UC Riverside. We do have International Village, which is not really, it's sort of kind of on campus, but not really. And that has been used mostly by Extension Center. And we've had some international students who've lived over there as well, but it's a little further away from campus, but they've had some success over there as well. So I'm not sure of where the research, I would have to look and see specifically, but I'm sure it's out there in terms of international students and their success rates with us. So.
Hmm. So I know a lot of international students will start off on campus and then they build friendships and find common interests with people. And
Mhm.
then eventually they move off campus and they're roommates, right?
Yeah.
With each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that those students, again, it's the community piece. If they're able to find a
Hmm.
connection and someone to have a roommate with, and to be once they find those connections, I think there's going to be more success. It's hard. It is very hard, I think, particularly for international students to find those connections, which is why we have such great resources on campus that help to sort of bring folks together. We've tried in residential life, for instance, to have students who live in the newer community. We're trying to build an international sort of living learning option, but most international students don't want to live together. They want to live sort of separated out because they want the quote unquote American experience and being able to have an American roommate, for instance, or an English native speaker so that they can work together. And so it's what we've tried to allow that to occur as well, and still making sure that those students are able to find their connections. So.
Yeah, if I may, I'm so glad to hear that our international students are more mature than I was when I was an international student. Because I made a catastrophic mistake of selecting roommates from my own country.
Mm.
That did not help my
Oh.
language, nothing, right? But the way is, yeah. So I was wondering if we have that an international village, but I hope they mix with others. Yeah, they do. Yeah, that's the way to go. That's why you come to US.
Sure,
Have
sure.
American roommate. That's the way to go. I
Yeah.
think there is a question from a
Mhm.
student. I mean, can you read it or do you want me to read it?
Oh, I don't have it.
Okay, I will read it. Basically, it's a question about the cost. This Francisca, she's not familiar with the subject of students living on campus.
Mm.
And does this have any cost? Yeah, I mean, it has a cost. So how does this cost compare with living somewhere else, right? You have to live somewhere, so no. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
cost.
So, well, I think there's cost of money, and then there's costs, and then so you have to sort of weigh the benefits of when you do live on campus, you do pay more money, I think, because you're closer to campus. Particularly the residence halls, because they have a meal plan attached as well. So there's a huge cost there. So often students will want to live off campus because it's cheaper than living on campus, right? But you also don't necessarily have the closeness of the resources, but you also don't have um, for instance, we had students who are dealing with the COVID situation, trying to get out of their leases and leave. If you live on campus, UCR was like, okay, go ahead. But all of the off-campus the campus apartments were like, no, this is a lease, you signed a contract. So the university's hands are tied at that point because we're not able to negotiate or work with the students. So there's those costs and benefits. And it is cheaper, yes, to live off campus, and the student can provide their own meal plan and they can cook their own meals and things of that nature. And so But then the downside to that is you don't necessarily have the support that you might have if you live on campus. And we do have cheaper options for our apartments on campus. So we do have some cheaper housing that are particularly our graduate students, because of the financial aid resources and things, will choose those cheaper apartments to live in that are on campus and are owned by UCR. So it just sort of depends on what you're interested in, and there is a cost factor to that. So.
Correct, correct. I see. I mean, if you cook for yourself, I mean, you may be able to save some money, but I mean, cafeterias that we have on campus are amazing, right? That type of food and so many selection of food. Yeah, you cannot cook that by yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess. June, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I have a question. So this comes up a lot during our recruitment with international students. They all know that we require first year to live on campus, but they also want to know if living on campus means better safety compared to live off campus, because parents don't mind paying extra for that extra safety, and that sense of safety is very important. I have a follow-up question as well, and kind of linked to the cafeteria as well as the dormitory setup. Is we have a lot of Middle Eastern Muslim students coming to our campus, and the first of all, they have a dietary restrictions, so halal food and all those is strongly preferred. And two is the female students would prefer to have their own room, so they don't want to share with others. And this has come up recently with quite a few sessions I had with Middle Eastern regions. They ask if they can live in apartment rather than live in the residential halls. Thank you.
Yeah. So with regard to the safety issue, I think that there are some students who it's sort of like the cost factor. We do, since we are on campus, we do have 24-hour resident advisors. We also we're very close to the UC Police Department, and generally what we have found with safety is that when students are not paying attention or maybe leaving their doors open or that's when things happen, right? So if they follow the policies, close the door, don't let other people in who they don't know, it's much more safer, particularly in the residence halls. I think off campus, you also have those resources as well. You have the police and things like that, but you may not have the patrols that happen. So it's sort of, again, with regard to safety, it just depends on where students want to live or choose to live. When students, the first year students who do live on campus and they do have a meal plan and live in the residence halls, we do have our dining services is able to work with some students, and they do provide some halal options. They also have kosher options. Actually, they don't have a kosher kitchen at UC Riverside, I've been told. So for those students, it's a little different. But if they work with dining services, they're able to provide some of those meals and being able to work with the student to get the correct types of things. There are some students who just cannot eat anything in those dining halls, and so they would have to get an exception to ask to have that taken care of. We do have a Middle Eastern student living learning community when we're in full operation, where we've had some students from Middle East who've wanted to live there, and many of them are Muslim, and we have worked to try to separate their suite style. So there's maybe 8 rooms in a suite, and they're all single gender and they share one bathroom. That's where a lot of those students have chosen to live. But you're right, in a traditional residence hall, you may have a room where there's 2 women, and then next door there might be 2 men, and that might not be. So it just depends on how the buildings are structured and where they might choose to live. But often we can work with them. We don't have single gender on our campus. We don't have single gender residence halls. So a whole building of females or a whole building of males, we just don't have that. And we do also We do have gender inclusive housing where men and women can live in the same room together if they choose to do that. So there's also that option.
Yeah, sorry, it's me again. Sorry.
Sure.
Okay, promise. No, could you, I mean, living learning community, could you please try to explain that? I mean, because I don't think that our international audience is aware what is living learning community.
Sure. So a living learning community for us, and I didn't talk too much about it in the presentation because of where we're at right now. We're currently not able to have all of our living learning communities, but essentially we have students who choose to live together in a certain community. They might all have we have identity base, which are maybe there are lesbian, gay, bisexual students who want to live in the same community. Maybe they're Middle Eastern or Pan-African or Mundo for our Chicano students, so, or Latinx students. And so they're living together in a community. They have programs that are geared toward that population. If it's there's a connection to the gender and equity offices on campus. So we have a partnership there where they're programming. We do have academic ones as well. So Ingenuity, for instance, is with our College of Engineering. We have academic advisors from the College of Engineering who will come over and do programs for the students who live in that hall. A full-on living learning community, we're not quite there yet, but that would be like everyone living together, taking the same classes, doing the same things in the same sequence. We're not quite there, but we do have partnerships with the colleges on our campus and the academic units. Honors is also another one, CHAS, CNAS, and so they're living together. They might have different majors, but they're all a part of the CNAS college. And so we have academic advisors from the different colleges who will help to do programs with those students. So that's how we're looking at a living learning community on our campus at UC Riverside. So, yeah.
Thank
you,
James.
Do you have, I know you do icebreakers, right, at the beginning of the quarter, so that everybody can meet each other and everything. But throughout the quarter, do you have programs that take students off campus that they can sign up to attend? Like, I don't know, trips to Disneyland or down to San Diego to see the tide pools. I don't know. I'm just asking if there are those types of programs.
We do. So a lot of and this is also where our faculty in residence, for instance, Dr. Nunley he really enjoys the museums in Los Angeles. So we'll have a bus trip. We've done bus trips to Los Angeles to the museums or to the Griffith Observatory, where we also there's an academic component to it as well. So we even this was a few years ago, we had students who went to Disneyland, but we also they were engineering students, so they talked about the way that the roller coasters move and the engineering that's involved in making those roller coasters. And so we try to also have there is some social component to it, but we also try to have a little bit of an academic component as well, so that the students are getting something from the experience more than just a social, that they're getting some academic pieces as well. But we have done those trips. There's also museums in Palm Springs and Joshua Tree, and so we've done those bus trips with our students as well. So yeah,
that's awesome. That's
sure.
Great.
They enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Makes me want to go back. Yeah, that's great. Well, I don't see any other questions from any of our participants. Anything else you wanted to share? Any other, even if it's a little off topic?
No, I just appreciate everyone who was able to attend. I know, and I sometimes tend to talk too fast, so I do apologize if I talk too fast. And I know some folks English is not their first language. And so what did he say? I apologize for that. Because
well, it's recorded. So,
yeah.
They can go back and listen in again.
Sure.
Well, Dr. Smith, we really appreciate the information you've given to us this evening. And I know that similar to UC Riverside, other universities across the United States do very similar things and have similar programs and, look at different studies to make sure that they are you know, really taking the students through the maximum experience while they're at the university. So
Yes, and as I mentioned, I've worked at other campuses, and so I've sort of been through those experiences. And something I touched on earlier was when I was a student, a college student, I sort of lived on campus for 4 of the 5 years that I was there, and got those experiences and wanted to go into this field. And so that's how I ended up going to graduate school to get a master's degree in student affairs and sort of administration. And so a lot of the campuses in the US are similar, that do provide those opportunities and access for students, and working with them to be successful as best as they can. So we are also a part of the Association of College and University Housing Officers International. So I'm a part of an organization that's also international with housing. So they do work with across the globe, so to speak, with different they call them accommodations offices in other countries. So yeah, it's a great opportunity. It's
right.
great. I love it. So
Yeah, you see the passion in your presentation. I can tell.
oh,
That's
thank you.
awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, I guess that's it for this evening. And next week is our final week. We'll be back to our Thursday, which is our typical night, and we hope to see everyone there. We're going to have Michael, actually, and his colleague from International Students and Scholars. Michael, as you know, is the Director of International Students and Scholars, and he and Kelly, his Associate Director, will be giving the final presentation in our series. So we hope that you will join us, and we look forward to seeing you then. And in the meantime, enjoy Thanksgiving. Thank you again. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.